Hello and welcome to episode 59 of Driver's Suit Blog Radio. As always, I'm your host, David G. Firestone. I am not going to lie, I don't feel good right now. Thankfully, it's not COVID, but I'm still feeling tired and cranky. So I'm going to do the news I was going to do this week, next week. And we'll just start off this episode with a few brief notes about the Daytona 500. This won't take more than a few minutes. Okay, and as always, the NASCAR season starts off with Speed Weeks, and Speed Weeks ends with the Daytona 500. I miss the more lengthy, you had the Busch Clash at Daytona, and then you had the qualifying, then you had the Daytona 500. I really do miss that. I also miss when it started directly after the Rolex 24, but this year's wasn't bad. The pole qualifying and the duels were fun, as always. And the race was, in my mind, great. Some people thought it could have used a bit more action, but the race was great regardless. Now, I've said this before, I'll say it again. NASCAR really needs to get rid of stage breaks. The stage system is pointless to begin with, but the stage breaks are beyond pointless. It completely messes up the flow of the race, and it really doesn't do much outside of that from a fan's perspective. I mean, yeah, you got the points and all of that happy horse shit, but it's just not good. I mean, even if you had stage breaks where the race stayed green at the end of the stage, I could live with that. But just slowing down the race for no real reason, no. And also, why do the laps in between the stage breaks count? Seriously, why not just have stage break laps don't count, give the teams however much time they need to work on their cars, and then, you get 5 minutes to work on your car, and then you can go back out. At least with that, it would sort of be more leveling of the playing field. But it's... that system would work, this system does not. The fans have not liked stage breaks, by the way, so this really isn't a hot take or a controversial take. Now, Fox debuted something that Formula One has already been doing for a year, the tiny helmet cameras, and I really like them. They've made their way into NASCAR. We've also seen it in Formula One, as I said. I'm thinking we might get them in IndyCar. And they might even make it to the NHRA at some point, but for now we're just going to enjoy them for what they are. I also understand, speaking of the helmet cameras, why when they're being broadcast they have to pixelate out the digital dashes, because all of the teams are watching the broadcast from their pit boxes, so you don't want to give away tactical information. Okay, I get that. But that doesn't mean it doesn't look weird. So on the broadcast side, as was made clear earlier this week, Tony Stewart's going to be racing the NHRA Top Alcohol Dragster schedule. He will also call a few races for Fox. I think he could be a great announcer full-time. He's really good in the booth, but, he's got his thing going on. That's fine. Danica Patrick will also be in the booth for a few races. I'm not a fan of having, 2 or 3 different drivers in the booth. I really also hate the race that they do every year where it's just the entire broadcast team is replaced by drivers. But I can live with Danica Patrick, and I really enjoy Tony Stewart. Congratulations to Ricky Stenhouse Jr. and JTG Doherty. I mean, I really like this year's Daytona 500. I'm looking forward to Fontana. And then the rest of the season, I don't know at this moment if Fontana is still going through with the short track plan. I really hope they don't. But I am looking forward to that in the rest of the season. So now with that out of the way, I told you this was going to be brief. I'm taking my first break. We're going to discuss my feelings on the Chicago Auto Show. I will be right back. So we're back, and I'm just going to do a little brief thing because I've been wanting to talk about this for a while. So by the time this podcast goes live, the 2023 Auto Show will have run its course, and in traditional fashion, I didn't go. Now, people who know me don't seem to understand why I don't go to the auto show, given how big of a car guy I am, but there is a reason, so allow me to explain. Actually, there are a number of reasons, so allow me to explain. So the Chicago Auto Show is great if you're into stock showroom cars, since that is what the majority of is what is on display. They do have a number of concept cars which are cool, but they're not as plentiful. There are also interactive exhibits which are also cool, but not as plentiful. But outside of that, there really isn't all that much that interests me there. I mean, yes, I've been to car shows and museums before, such as, I've gone to Vet Fest on occasion, and I've been to the Franklin Auto Museum in Tucson, but those are different. See, Vet Fest is a custom car show that had a lot of racing, not just like home-built race cars, but a few professional show cars there too, back in the day. And these are designed and built by hot rodders who build their own cars from the ground up, not corporate guys who build them in a factory. Let's be honest here. Corporate America doesn't understand the hot rod culture as much as they think they do, and I'll give you an example. Let's talk about the Plymouth Prowler. I can't talk today. So the Prowler was released in, I think, like the late 90s. That was designed on a 1930s hot rod coupe. The problem is it had zero bite in terms of engine power, and you couldn't even do a burnout with it. So it sold very poorly and subsequently dismissed. Now, I bring this up because the Prowler is what you would see at the Chicago Auto Show, but an actual 1932 coupe is what you would see at a custom car show. I like custom cars because hot rodders build them from the ground up, and they can add whatever customization and cool paint jobs they want. Now, the Franklin Auto Museum in Tucson is a different case because it's a showcase of very rare Franklin automobiles, which they were a car company that went out of business decades before I was born, and prior to me stumbling upon them, I'd never heard of them. So when I traveled to Tucson to see my parents a few years ago, I took the opportunity to go to the Franklin Auto Museum, and if you're in Tucson and you're a car guy, you gotta go there. I'm gonna give them a shout out. It's a fascinating place. I learned so much about not just the Franklin Car Company, but vintage cars in general that I had no idea before. Now, the second issue is the venue itself. If you've never been to the McCormick Place in Chicago, Illinois, congratulations, you're a hell of a lot smarter than I am. Now, I've been to a few convention centers over the years, some for fun events, some for work, and I can tell you that there is no convention center that is consistently hotter in terms of temperature than McCormick Place. Regardless of what temperature it is outside, it feels like it's 90 degrees inside at all times, unless it's over 90 degrees. And I say that because I had to go there one time in July as part of a work event. It was about 95 degrees outside. I don't even want to... It was like basically like being in a sauna for 2 hours. Now, McCormick Place is also located in an area where transportation to and from the venue can be dicey, especially when it comes to public transportation. If you're driving and you're looking for a parking place, good luck, because you're in downtown Chicago. Parking spaces are few and far between. So, I don't have a car, so utilizing public transportation from the North Shore section of the suburbs is kind of an issue. And I get that there are other convention centers in the area, Donnelly Stevens in Rosemont and the Renaissance Convention Center in Schaumburg. I mean, they both have the same flaws as the McCormick Place, but in terms of accessibility, both public transportation and parking, they're actually better. Now, even with the very reasonable price of $15, which is a good price in this day and age, I still can't justify going there. Again, there isn't much racing or custom stuff there, and while the interactive and concept cars exhibits are cool, it's not worth the admission price. You know, the target audience is more for those who like showroom models or just find cars in general interesting. Okay, that's fine. But I'd like a hot rod show. I'll take a racing car show. I'll take customs. But just stock showroom just does not interest me. Yeah, that's pretty much it. Just a little brief explanation to a question I get asked. So with that out of the way, we're going to go to the third and final segment where I will present a project I've been working on for some time. So we're back with the final segment of this week's podcast, and I've been working on this for a while. At any given moment, I have anywhere between 5 and 10 things I'm working on, and I would have done this sooner, but I wanted to give this the time and effort it deserves, because I wanted to do it right, not quickly. So let's go. Now, I've discussed persons of auto racing on this podcast and the Driver Seat blog before. Now, names like Lewis Hamilton, Wendell Scott, Willie T. Ribbs, Antron Brown, Jesse Iwuji, Roger Carruth, Chase Austin, and Bubba Wallace are all very common and well-known names. But today we're going to discuss women of color in auto racing. Now, the story of auto racing and women of color is actually more deep than most people realize. Now, many modern fans only associate Tia Norfleet with women of color in auto racing. Now, Shauna Latrice Tia Norfleet is the daughter of former driver and owner Bobby Norfleet. And here's a fun fact for you when it comes to Bobby Norfleet. The 2000 Craftsman Truck Series race at Portland, the Line X 255, was not only Bobby's only official NASCAR National Series start, it was also the first and only time 2 drivers of color started a race, the other one being Bill Lester. While Tia did have experience in regional racing and was the first woman in NASCAR, was the first woman to hold an ARCA and NASCAR license, she never actually made a NASCAR National Series start in her career. Now, I have to discuss the controversy surrounding Tia, so please bear with me. I do facts. So, the controversy surrounding Tia started on March 6, 2013 with a New York Times article published by then sports reporter Viv Bernstein. In this article, a number of inconsistencies were brought up concerning Tia's self-promotion. These inconsistencies include that she has only raced in one low-level event where she ran one lap before parking her car. In racing, that's referred to as a start and park. She claims she was 24, but according to official public records, she is actually 26 years old at the time the article was published. And there was also a claim that she had several criminal offenses on her record. Now, while this did lead to some controversy, it should be noted that she eventually did admit to the start and park as well as said criminal offenses. Now, she also claimed that she never stated that she was in the NASCAR Nationwide Series, which would be a valid claim provided there weren't readily available pictures of her wearing a fire suit with a Nationwide Series patch in the proper position. Now, I should point out the Nationwide Series is now referred to as the Xfinity Series. Now, sadly, her prominence here is somewhat disappointing because there are 2 other women of color who readily deserve the spotlight above her. I'm going to profile both of them right now. The first example is Cheryl Lynn Glass. Now, she was born in Mountain Glass, California on December 24th, 1961, and she was the daughter of Marvin and Shirley Glass. The family moved to Seattle in 1963, and by the age of 9, Glass had a business where she was making and selling dolls by hand to various shops in the area, and she would get paid $150 to $300 per doll, which in today's money is $1,177 to $2,355 in today's money. Now, around this same time, she became interested in auto racing because she learned about children racing quarter-midget race cars by reading a magazine. Using the funds from her doll business, she bought her own equipment and began racing in the midget circuit with her father's support. The first year of her competition saw her become the first girl ever to win Rookie of the Year honors. Not just girl of color, girl in general. And for 5 consecutive years, she was the state and regional champion and was one of the top 10 drivers nationally. She dropped out of college at the age of 18, bought her first sprint car, and spent her time racing at Skagit Speedway in Mount Vernon, Washington. I apologize if I butchered the pronunciation. After winning Rookie of the Honors in the Northwest Sprint Car Association, she would race over 100 races in her career, and eventually made it to Indy Lights, which was then the Kart American Racing Series, though it does tend to change. Earlier incarnations do tend to change names on a frequent basis, which I learned doing this research. She would race in 3 races, the 13th race in 1990 at the Pennsylvania International Speedway at Nazareth. She started 9th and finished 7th out of 11 drivers, and in 1991 she raced 2 events, the season opener, the Long Beach Street Circuit in Long Beach, California, where she started and finished 18th, retiring early due to electrical issues. But then the second race at Phoenix International Raceway would end up being the final race of her career. She crashed during that race, and that was when her career ended. Now, there's 2 different sort of stories as to why she stopped racing. Some say it was due to the lack of funds. Others say it was because of injuries suffered during the crash. I have yet to hear anything conclusively one way or the other. After retiring, she started her own design studio, Cheryl Glass Designs, and she spent 12 years designing wedding gowns and formal evening wear. But it was not long after it was in 1991 that she before I read this next part, I'm going to give you fair warning. This is not going to be a nice part, but the truth often isn't. In 1991, she was the victim of a sexual assault during a break-in. The police said that there was not strong enough evidence to press charges against the accused, and this haunted her until she committed suicide by jumping off the George Washington Memorial Bridge in Seattle on July 15th, 1997. Rest in peace, Cheryl Lynn Glass. Now, I'm going to pose a question that I think everyone thinks they know the answer to, but I guarantee you they don't. Question is, who was the first woman of color to win a major American racing event? Most, if not all, would say that there has never been a woman of color to achieve such a feat, yet they would be wrong. Very wrong, in fact. It is correct that while in the major leagues of circle track racing in America, there is yet to be a woman of color to visit the winner's circle in a major event. Drag racing is another story entirely. In terms of diversity, drag racing is a great equalizer. There is no other form of auto racing that has seen wins by Black, Hispanic, Middle Eastern drivers, both men and women, old and young, rich, poor, and it's anyone can race, anyone can win. And this is why for our next story we encounter a woman by the name of Peggy Llewellyn. Born on December 26, 1972 in San Antonio, Texas, Peggy Llewellyn is the daughter of Gene Llewellyn, who was very involved in motorbike racing. Now, being of Jamaican, Mexican, and American descent, Peggy began racing at an early age. Various motorcycle classes until eventually landing in Pro Stock Motorcycle in the NHRA for 6 races in 2001. But due to lack of sponsorship, she had to leave the sport. During the time she was away, she became involved in real estate, but in 2007, she came back to the sport, and that's when it happened. Peggy Llewellyn would become the first woman of color to win a major auto racing event in America in 2007. Specifically, September 23, 2007, at the O'Reilly NHRA Fall Nationals at the Texas Motorplex in Dallas. Here is a round-by-round statement of this is a breakdown of the races in her event. In the first round, she beats Steve Johnson due to Johnson red lighting by 1/1000th of a second negative. In the second round, she beat Karen Stouffer with a 7.05 ET to Stouffer's 7.06 ET. The semifinals saw two really bad reaction times, with Peggy getting a .059 reaction time to Chip Ellis's .105 time, and getting a whole shot with a 7.11 ET to Ellis's 7.110. Now the final saw Peggy Llewellyn on her Buell defeating Andrew Hines on his Harley-Davidson V-Rod. Peggy's .010 reaction time, 7.020 ET, and 190 mile an hour speed saw her take the whole shot win over Andrew Hines, who had .045 RT, 7.007 ET, and 191.16 mile an hour speed. I should also note that by the end of the 2000 season, she was fourth in the point standings, 801 points above Angèle Sampey, who was then and now the winningest woman in professional history at the time of recording in the NHRA. Though she did race a handful of races in 2008, she left the sport during that season. Now, while the wider American media really didn't notice or report her achievement, that does not mean her achievement didn't go unnoticed. The Elements of a Champion Foundation named her the 2009 Female Athlete of the Year, and the Women's Sports Foundation recognized her at the 32 and 33rd Annual Salute to Women in Sports Galas in 2010 and 2011, respectively. Now, I'm going to ask the obvious question here. If she was the first woman of color to win a major auto racing event, why isn't she more widely known? Well, there are a couple of factors here. Number one is the fact that drag racing, even back then, was sort of seen in the American sports media. It wasn't seen as quote-unquote real racing. And it's kind of not difficult to see why, because most of the drivers in the lower ranks of drag racing aren't professional drivers. They're either weekend warriors or young kids looking to go pro. And since drag racing is driving in a straight line for a quarter mile or 1,000 feet, most don't see the appeal. To the American media, a 7-second drag race is seen as easy as opposed to a 5-hour, 600-mile-long race at Charlotte or any other oval track. Now, it's also needed to be noted that while it has a decent-sized fan base, Pro Stock Motorcycle has always been sort of at the lower end of the professional categories of the NHRA, never really running the full season. In 2022, for example, of the 22 NHRA Camping World Drag Racing Series events, Pro Stock Motorcycle was only involved in 15 of them. So those two factors are what led to Peggy's victory never being fully reported and her never really being given the respect she deserves. And I think that's terrible, and I'm doing this because most forms of auto racing, especially NASCAR, are traditionally seen as the domain of white males. I can't talk today for whatever reason. Yet, there is a lot more diversity in auto racing than you might think, and I think we should take time to spotlight some of these drivers, team owners, track owners, crew chiefs, crew members, and others. I'm glad I've had the chance to do this, and I hope to work on some more of these for later podcasts. And with that, episode 59 comes to an end. I'll be back next week with episode 60. We're going to be doing more news and notes since I didn't get a chance to do it this week. I'm Dave Farson. Leave a like, comment, share, and subscribe, and I'll see you next week for episode 60.